Hello and welcome to the Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition. I'm Sarah Baumann.
And I'm Kenny Crookston. And together we're here to uncover the amazing and unusual stories that define the brass band world. From its origins and traditions to the modern innovations and fantastic music that have shaped this remarkable culture.
In each episode, we'll dive into Brass Bands England's exciting brass band archive, housed at Heritage Quay at the University of Huddersfield.
So, whether you're a seasoned brass band lover,
just getting started,
or just curious, you're in the right place.
Let's go! Hello and welcome to the Brass Band Podcast, the Archive Edition. This is the first of a 6-part series talking all about the brass band archive and everything surrounding it. I'm Sarah Baumann. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Brass Bands England, and I'm joined by our CEO, Kenny. Hi, Kenny.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be here and really looking forward to going through the archive over the next few weeks and the fascinating history that's contained in there.
Yeah, so at Brass Bands England, we're a support organisation for the brass banding sector in England, but we've got members further afield than that across the world, and we're all about supporting and promoting the wonderful, wonderful sector of brass banding. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what brass banding is and all of the great history of banding as well as stuff that's going on right now. So you might know something about a brass band. You might have seen them in your village or your town on Remembrance, something like that. But we're going to make sure that you properly know what a brass band is, what a brass band does as part of this podcast series. So if you're not sure, make sure you keep listening. So, Brass Band Archive. What's the history, Kenny? Tell us a little bit about it.
So the Brass Band Archive originated actually in Lancashire, in Wigan. I guess it was a life's passion for a couple of gentlemen who, one of them's no longer with us, sadly, Walter Ainscough and his friend Alan Marsh, who had this enormous collection of ephemera and records and music and everything you can imagine, trophies and every sort of historical artefact that they'd gathered up over a lifetime. A lot of things had been donated to them over a very long period of time, and they had a room above a funeral parlour in Wigan, which served as the home of the Brass Band Archive for a very long time. It was something that was always present in their consciousness, not something that I had ever visited personally, until we got some information about 5-6 years ago that the building was no longer viable in terms of their occupation of it, and that they were really going to have to close down. At the time, Brass Band England was actually trustee of the archive, and we were designated as the future home of the Brass Band Archive at that time when it became unviable. That meant that we had to go there, empty it out, bring everything in about 3 or 4 big lorries to the Brass Bands England headquarters in Barnsley, and basically just filled up the boardroom with it. And it sat there in boxes and in various states of disrepair for quite a number of years. And then we managed to start finding some funding to be able to deal with the project properly, which is what we'd always wanted to do with it, to have it properly catalogued, and it's finally found its home at the Huddersfield University Heritage Quay.
Yeah, I've been working for Brass Bands England just over 5 years, and I do remember my first day. We wandered upstairs to have a look, wander around the office to see what was there, and there's this massive stuff still to be catalogued, still to be explored.
Only 8,000 sets of music there.
Yeah, there's a lot. So there's loads and loads of sheet music stretching from, late 1800s to modern day, all sorts of different levels and composers, lots of photographs, lots of stories still to be uncovered in those photographs that we're going to be working through in the next little while. Uniforms, trophies, stand banners. It's a really interesting mix of music and ephemera. It paints a really interesting picture of what brass banding is.
The entire history of brass bands is there, one way or another. I mean, there'll be a lot of gaps to be filled up, but if somebody started today to do an investigation into the history of the brass bands, they would get an awful long way through it with the information that we have there. some really fascinating things. At the time you're talking about, I mean, if I was ever in the office at lunchtime, I would just take a wander around it sometimes and pick up bits and pieces, and you'd find, old records and old contest programs from the Crystal Palace and, early British Open contests at Bellevue. And it's fascinating to just have a quick read through some of them. I mean, inevitably you see some famous names there, but also a lot of names that have just completely disappeared. Thousands of bands that have come and gone over the years. But more than anything, it's a great social history in there.
Yeah.
I think it tells you the roots of brass bands. I mean, it's a well kind of worn, we're northern working class culture. It's definitely nothing like as simple as that. But anybody doing a delve into their family history that knew somebody, when their ancestors had a brass band connection, it would certainly be an interesting place to have a look. There is a massive social history in there.
So over the next few episodes, we're going to be diving into some particular topics that are really interesting as part of the archive and a part of brass banding social history. We're going to look into contests in a little bit more detail and the competitions that brass bands participate in. We're going to look at where brass bands fit into our celebrations as a country, things like remembrance. We're going to talk about the diversity of banding and what it looks like now, how it's changing, the politics of banding. We're going to get through a lot in the next little while. But before that, it would be good to talk a little bit about your journey in brass banding, Kenny.
And yours, Sarah.
And mine too.
Brief though it is so far.
Where did your banding journey start?
Well, it kind of started before I can remember, to be perfectly honest with you, Sarah. I was brought up in a family with two older brothers, Graham and David, Graham's 10 years older than me and David's 5 years older than me. Both very, very good brass players in their younger days and beyond that as well. And I basically just had an instrument thrust in my hand at some point. Somewhere there's a picture of me about 3 or 4 years old standing holding a flugelhorn. It looks like I'm playing it. I shudder to think what it must have sounded like, but it's certainly evidence that I was playing at an early age. And I just continued there, joined the local brass band at West Calder in West Lothian, and that's in central Scotland, just between Edinburgh and Glasgow, which at the time had quite a vibrant set of young players there. There was a really good, enthusiastic teacher in the band. Tom Martin was the conductor, who had a great reputation in teaching young players. Learned in the band there for a couple of years. There was a few things happened. My brothers had both kind of moved on to a stronger band in the area, which was at Broxburn, closer to Edinburgh. And for various reasons, I followed them at quite a young age. I was 10 actually when I was playing there, and they were one of the best bands in Scotland at the time. And I found myself playing third cornet with them when I was 10-year-old. So spent a few years there, gradually moved my way up the cornet section, won a few kind of solo competitions along the way, I guess. There was East of Scotland trophies that they still use. I'm sure I've got my name on them somewhere, if they're still in existence. Maybe it's something we could get into the archive. But no, and at that point, when I was 18, I went to Whitburn Band, which was undoubtedly the strongest band in Scotland at the time. Major Peter Parks was the conductor there. And Whitburn were really just starting to make a mark. We were on the television in Best of Brass and things like that. We were doing a lot of the major contests, doing really well in the big contests like the National and the Europeans, playing all over the place in concerts and recordings. And it was just a fantastic journey. And I did that for 20 odd years. I was the youngest ever president of Whitburn Band. I was basically involved in the band management from quite a young age. And it was a great passion in my life. I met my wife through banding. She played with a rival band in CWS Glasgow at the time. She came and played with Whitburn as well later. And in 2004 it was, and the British Bandsmen were looking for an editor. And I had done a bit of writing for 4 Bars Rest. I'd done a bit for Brass Band World, just as an enthusiast, and a tiny bit for the Bandsmen some years earlier as well. And I just fancied it. I never thought I had any chance of getting the job, but I thought I'll only get it if I apply. And I did, and I got it. And I spent the next 14 years as the third longest serving editor of the world's oldest weekly music magazine.
That's pretty cool.
Which my wife reminds me of every time she wants me to feel old. Did that for a bit. Then the BBE chief executive job came up for the first time in 2018. And again, same thing. See if we can get this job. Somebody else will probably get it, but I might as well go for it. And lo and behold, I got it. And that's where I find myself. And the last 6 years have actually been really fantastic, really rewarding, richly rewarding in terms of the team that I've been able to work with and the achievements that we've managed over that period. I think the way we've built the organisation and the way that BB has consolidated its position in brass banding, it's now recognised as a real force within the world of brass bands, not just in England, but across the whole of the brass banding world now, which has always been an issue for England. I always wondered when I was young why England didn't have what Scotland always had, the Scottish Brass Band Association. Since 1895 it was there. There was one in New Zealand in 1890, but England never had that. And I think we've really been able to provide an important core, if you like, the glue that's kind of held banding together through COVID, certainly.
Yeah.
Which I shudder to think actually what it would have been like had we not been around at that time. But I think what we've achieved over the last 6 years has been really fantastic. But again, it could only be done with a very far-sighted board and a really brilliant staff team as well. So that's how we got here.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I joined BBE just over 5 years ago. I'm a musician, but not a brass player. When I first joined, it was kind of an education coordinator position, which I had experience in through arts and culture. I thought, oh, this looks great. I don't know much about bands. That'll be interesting. And I when I saw the job come up, my first thought was, oh, that's a really interesting community to work with. I thought it was really fascinating how intergenerational working was really common, which you don't see that much in arts and culture, that you can have a 9-year-old and a 90-year-old playing next to each other. I thought that was really fascinating and really interesting. But actually, I knew very little about brass bands. And the last 5 years has been a completely eye-opening journey into this amazing sector. And I am constantly bowled over by not only the quality that amateur, and I say that word with quotation marks around, non-professionals who do this in their voluntary time, the quality of music that they produce, the time commitment that they put in is totally amazing, and the community that they build around the bands across the country. And really, in most parts of the country, very, very nearby, there is a band hiding there, whether you know it or not. They are there doing their thing. So to my absolute shame, the cornet that Kenny handed me on my first day of work is still relatively unplayed and gathering a bit of dust. But I do have a personal commitment that I need to actually do that. And I will. I'm determined that I will. But I would describe myself as an honorary bands person.
Well, as it happens, I've got a bottle of valve oil with me in my case there, so I'm going to lend you that before we leave here.
That's good. That's good.
And we'll look forward to that that debut that you're going to make this summer, I believe, that you've promised us you're going to make this summer.
Yeah, I have. It is getting beyond embarrassing now, and we have a new initiative this summer called Brass Band Week, which is a public awareness campaign about brass banding, getting more people to understand what it is. So I have made a promise, which I have now vocalised, which means I have to do it, which I'm going to have to be able to play something by that point.
I think it's fascinating, though, when you talk about your lack of knowledge of brass bands before you came here. I think that is such a common tale.
Yeah. The
number of people I meet just in your normal day-to-day life and wherever you happen to go socially, what do you do for a job? Or work in brass bands. And I can remember one person saying to me, you must spend a lot of time going around the working men's clubs in the north of England then, do you? And I said, funnily enough, I've never done that, But there's the stereotype right there.
Yeah.
And there, it is a stereotype that is portrayed very frequently in the media as well. There's a industrial decline in the north of England, in some town in Lancashire or something like that. And they'll stick on some brass band music in the background, or they'll go and visit the local brass band that happens to be having a bad night because they've only got 12 players there. And so I always find it fascinating that that's the outside view brass bands, but you step inside it, you've been to quite a few high quality events, things like the European Championships that we presented in Birmingham a few years ago. It's a million miles from any of that. You've got some of the finest brass players in Europe coming along and plying their trade and performing music that's incredibly difficult technically and musically, really difficult to perform to an extremely high standard. And the people that are seeing this for the first time are absolutely bowled over by it. Quite often I'll point people to things like wob play and show them, like, just have a look at this and tell me what you think about it.
Yeah.
It's an amazing difference from their perception.
I think so. And I think absolutely there are across the country those bands doing brilliant community-focused events, and they're the bands that you'll see performing at your Summer Fete or at Remembrance, and they do so much, commit so much, and still play to an amazing quality. But when I was an outsider, there's no way that I knew anything about contesting or anything about this championship level banding. I don't think that it is common knowledge that happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances in the culture as well, and for people, coming into banding, slightly later in life, even to be able to take it all in, I think is quite a hard thing. You go into a band contest and even getting all the terminology in your head. I remember we had Eleanor working for us, who worked in the archive, and she was working for us at the European in Birmingham, and somebody had said to her, "Have you got the draw?" Of course, Eleanor had never been to a band contest in her life. Have you got the draw? I mean, what on earth does that mean?
Yeah.
It could mean absolutely anything to somebody who's there to do a specific job on the day. But it suddenly hits home to you that all these things that we just talk about as if it's just completely natural, it doesn't make any sense at all to a normal person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a different world, and it is a culture to learn. And I think that's what's really important. A lot of the items that we're going to talk about that are in the archive, it's about bringing to life the culture of banding and what's important to those people that commit so much time to doing it, and the audiences that enjoy it so much as well. So I think now's a good time to bring to life some of the archive. So as part of the collection, there are around 8,000 sets of brass band music, ranging massively in dates, stuff from the late 1800s up to modern day. So throughout this podcast series, we're going to hear some clips of some of that music so you can understand how amazing and varied the brass band repertoire is. So we're going to start off with a little excerpt from High Peak by Eric Ball.
That wasn't the exact recording, but I do remember when I was very young, I must have been 6 at the time actually, my father had an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, and that was one of the recordings that he had on it was Brickhouse and Rastrick winning at the Royal Albert Hall with that piece. And the winning performance fascinated me, and I think it kind of lit a fire in me actually, that one of these days I was determined I was going to go to the Albert Hall, which for me was 400 miles away. It was a very, very long way away in 1969. I'll go there one day, I'll play there one day, and of course all these things actually do happen later in life. But it was one of these pieces that really did inspire, I guess, the passion that I've developed for brass bands. And of course, any first section bander in the UK, I'll be used to having played it quite a lot recently, including myself actually.
Yeah.
And, we won't talk about the result, but I did enjoy the experience of playing the piece on from one of the greatest brass band composers, of course, Eric Baumann.
Yeah. So we'll talk later on in the series about repertoire written for competition and for brass band contest, which is a very, very unique genre of music, not something that's generally seen in the rest of the classical world, but it does bring about some really interesting, challenging repertoire. And across brass banding history, all sorts of really prominent, significant composers have written for brass band, and we'll explore some of those in later episodes too. Let's bring the focus back to the archive. We could natter on all day, but actually what we really want to explore in this are significant pieces in the archive and the importance of the archive. So, Kenny, why do you think that having an archive of brass banding is important?
I think the culture itself does rely on an accurate portrayal of itself to the outside world, really. And I think that having everything in a central repository is just such a huge asset to us. Anybody doing research for any time in the future now has a natural starting point. Somewhere where they can go and everything is there, everything's catalogued, it's all in a protected environment. There are some very delicate pieces of ephemera there. The knowledge that's going to be there for the foreseeable future, I think, is a huge asset for brass banding in itself. I spoke earlier about Brass Bands England and, playing a central role in the development of brass bands, but it is a culture that's been a bit chaotic. We have kind of thrived on kind of self-determination, I guess. There's been competitions that have driven the structure of the whole thing, but we've never really been something that has worked collectively towards a bright future. Some fantastic things have happened nevertheless along the way, but I think just having the certainty that all this material is going to be there forever, and anybody that is doing any kind of research, academic research or whatever it looks like, any kind of dive into the history of brass bands, they've got a great starting point there. And the way that we've got it set up at Huddersfield now is absolutely incredible, actually. Yeah. It's really fantastic.
And I think from going from a place where it was cared for by very, very enthusiastic people who did amazing work in getting the basis of the collection together to where it is now is a huge, huge step, because we know that it's protected. It's in a secure place. It's in this amazing temperature-controlled facility, but it's also available and accessible to people who wouldn't necessarily stumble across it. And certainly our feedback from Heritage Quay is that in particular, the journals like the British Bandsman are the really, really popular pieces, because alongside all of the commentary around what the contest results are and, adverts from the time, there's social commentary in that as well. And you'll know from being editor and writing for those papers how significant that commentary can be.
Well, I used to have the entire Bandsman archive in my own house, which was quite a responsibility when you think about it. It wasn't in a kind of fireproof or flood-proof environment, so I was quite relieved to get rid of it at the time it was moved on. We spoke about the archive having the whole history of brass bands. From 1887, the Bandsman actually has the whole history of brass bands. Every word, every event has been recorded in there, and that is an incredible source. We don't have the entire archive, just to be clear, but there are some fairly major chunks of it there. And it is it's a natural starting point for anybody who want. If you know the specific year that something's happened, it's a great place to start looking. I mean, some of the content of the Bandsman in the early days was incredibly dull. They used to do the full sets of adjudicators' remarks for every band in every contest that ever took place, and you must have needed a pretty powerful magnifying glass. And this is before everybody had electricity as well. I can only imagine you'd have to kind of read it in daylight, but it was a pretty testing experience reading a lot of the editions of the Bandsman back in the day. Also, there was some fascinating stuff in there as well, but there was a procedural nature to it. There's been a contest on, therefore we're going to give you every detail of everything that happened. But somebody somewhere will be interested in that, I can be sure.
Definitely. And seeing the pieces that were performed and selected, the makeup of the players and the conductors and where those were held, what the audience was like, it's all really interesting, plotting the development of the sector.
I think one other thing is that we've celebrated, the high achievers, the great conductors, the great players over the decades, going right back. The famous conductors like Halliwell and Alexander Owen and, Fred Mortimer, or the Mortimer family really, and then later in that, of course. But what I think is failed to have been celebrated in banding is that let's call them the ordinary people that have still done some pretty fantastic things, but history has kind of largely passed them by. They're not celebrated nationally. They may be in the history of a certain band in a certain area, old Jim, the great trombone player or whatever it was, but it'd be great if we can actually delve in there and find out more about these people. And I'm sure there's some pretty fantastic achievements in there, and probably some pretty outstanding recordings of them as well. Loads of people that I've never heard of. Vast majority of the brass band loving population will never have heard of. So, there's going to be some fascinating reading in there as well.
I think so. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to the next little while is uncovering the stories and the photographs that we have. There's a big collection of photographs that at the moment we have a very broad idea of who those people are or the bands that they are connected to. We are still in the process of uncovering the archive. It's still in a cataloguing phase. So the initial collection that came to us is still being worked through by our wonderful archivist Danni and amazing volunteers who come every week to support us with that. So there's still a lot to explore, never mind all of the significant items that are out there in the community that may one day come to us. Yeah, it's an amazing history to uncover.
And it's a living, breathing thing as well. I mean, it's continually growing. You mentioned the archive volunteers. They do some fantastic work in our offices and remotely. And, you know, the volunteers that set the thing up in the first place back in the Wigan days, without them, it wouldn't exist at all. But like so many of the best things in brass bands, it's done by volunteers.
Yeah.
It's not a world that's dominated by professionals, certainly. But what we've ended up with is something that's extremely valuable, and it's just going to continue to be even more so as it grows. So, and of course, the very fact that we're sitting doing a podcast here in the name of the Brass Band Podcast is fantastic, because we're able to continue the name of a former Brass Band podcast, which may have featured one of the present presenters, along with my great pal Dave Kinross, who has very kindly given us the title to use. So a big thanks to Dave for that. The Brass Band England team are hugely appreciative of that great gesture. So it's great to be able to carry that name through.
So to give you a little bit more information about what the archive team do and what the archive looks like, we're going to hand over to our archivist Danni and the volunteer team to tell you a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Danni. I am the National Heritage Lottery funded archivist. I have been with BBE since January. There's been previous archivists that have worked on the collections, but I am cataloguing the rest of the original collection, cataloguing the donations and helping and assisting with all the outreach work that is going on with the Brass Bands Archive. So we are currently surrounded by boxes in the Brass Band Archive offices at BBE in Barnsley. It's a Wednesday, and every Wednesday we have two brilliant volunteers that come in and assist with the cataloguing. They've actually been here longer than me. We have John, who is a bander, and we have Lesley, who's a bander as well. I am new to the brass banding world, so I've had a lot of information given to me. So they've been very, very useful, and it's a fantastic world to be in. I will pass you over to John to introduce himself. He will tell you a little bit about what he does and why he came to the archive in the first place.
Hi, my name is John. I've been here since 2021. I came originally to do some electrical work for BBE, and while I was here, Sophie, who was here at that time, said, John, just come and have a look upstairs to see what we've got here. And I went upstairs, and I've never seen anything like it. It was just like Aladdin's cave, and I just couldn't believe it. And so what happened was that I said to Sophie, I don't know whether you're having any volunteers, but if you do, then can you please let us know? Anyway, I never heard anything. And then a colleague of mine saw something on Facebook, I think it was. They were advertising for helpers. So I phoned Alex Parker and said, is there any chance I can come and have a look and do some work with you? And he went, when can you start?
And you've never left since?
I've never left since. And I've been here now, as I say, since 2021. And it's never been a dull Wednesday. Every Wednesday is something different. Working together as a team is amazing, because obviously I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I've worked with quite a few archivists now. And now I've got Danni and Lesley to work with. And I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, John's been here a long time, so any banding questions, anything that I don't know about that I've come across that the answer might be from 3 years ago, I do ask John. But also Lesley's been here about a year, haven't you, Lesley? So tell us a bit about how you got into the archive.
So my name's Lesley, and I started volunteering in January 2023. And like John, really look forward to my Wednesdays, because we find out all sorts of things. And again, like John, I saw it as an advert on the internet for volunteers, and I had just retired from my job and thought, actually, I think I would really enjoy this. I've been involved in banding for quite a number of years, and I'm really enjoying being part of this team that's looking at the music and archiving it for the future.
Yeah, both of our volunteers are so valuable. But we don't just have John and Lesley, we have some remote volunteers that have worked on the project. We've recently got another remote volunteer called Sarah, who's just completed a blog on women in the spotlight on our website. So take a look at that. So obviously they've come in and done quite a lot of music work with us, a lot of cataloguing the music. But have either of you actually done any archive work before, or are we the first ones that you've sort of assisted with?
I've never actually done any archive work before in my life, but I'm finding it so interesting. You're working on music, and sometimes you actually know that person that's arranged it or written it, and you can put a face to a piece of music. And then obviously the other ones that's been done years and years ago. I've been playing now for about 50 years, roughly, non-stop. So I've got a reasonable amount of knowledge. We discuss things together. If we've got a problem, we'll talk to each other, and it's great teamwork.
Yeah, there's been a few times where I've catalogued something and not known the dates of an arranger and composer and couldn't find anything online. And John will look over my shoulder and be like, oh, I know him. He died 3 years ago, or he's still alive. He was born here. So I don't think you can ever underestimate the living knowledge of brass banding, and obviously having that knowledge as well as archival knowledge coming in and working with the collections. Lesley, you've never worked with an archive either, have you? What's the most interesting thing you found then?
No, I've not been involved in archive. I did work in a library for a while, which I suppose is similar in that you've got collections of things, but not quite the same. What's the most interesting things we found? We have some really interesting scores that have gone into the library, some handwritten original test piece scores and pieces that we used in the 1920s. We find all sorts of things, and it's very exciting that you can open up a folder of music and you're not quite sure what you're going to find. And like John said, it is just fascinating when you find something either you've played, because like John, I've been playing for over 50 years as well, and there are pieces that we've played and you remember playing them at different places or with different people. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's some exciting annotations on some of them, isn't there? And some interesting ones. It does sometimes give us a little giggle on a Wednesday.
Yeah, it's lovely when you pick up a piece of music and these people have written on it. Some of them you don't want to read out what people have put, but other parts are really interesting and it's helpful to other people. When I first came and I went upstairs and I could see all this memorabilia laid out, and I just turned round and I saw a cup and it had got blue ribbons on it. And I thought, I think I know what that is. And I picked it up, and it was the Granada Band of the Year, right? And I've been to Granada Band of the Year probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 times. And all the band's names were on that cup. Desford, Grimethorpe, Fordens. But I'm thinking, this is just like being in Seventh Heaven, picking this cup up. I've got hold of this cup. And people have had to play for this cup. I didn't even know where it were, because obviously the Granada Band of the Year has not been on go since probably the 70s, when it were on television every year for the entertainment contest. But it was just like, whoa, this is fantastic. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, we do have good selections of trophies in the archive. We have more than you would think we have, and they're all sort of different shapes and sizes, and some of the trophies are absolutely fantastic. Probably need a bit of a polish now. I'd have loved to see the office, how John describes it. He describes it in such a magical way, but it was before my time, and when they managed to get all the archive material to Barnsley to get it catalogued, and it filled, I think, the eaves upstairs, and I've been told all about how much you had to wiggle through the path that people had created on a day-to-day basis.
I've never seen as much memorabilia as they were up there. It was just fantastic.
One of the most interesting things about the cataloguing process is when you look at the music, and often they're stamped with the name of the band that the music has come from. And that's fascinating because they're bands from all over the country. And obviously John is from this part of the country and I'm from the south of England, and there are bands that we're more familiar with. So we always have a conversation about, oh, that band's from so-and-so, or yes, that band played there, or I remember doing that with that band.
There is a north-south divide in the office sometimes. It can get a bit heated on different topics. I'm from Leeds, so I'm firmly in the northern camp, but I sometimes do stay out of it.
Friendly banter.
Friendly
Definitely.
banter.
Yeah, definitely.
And like Lesley said, a lot of the parts are stamped with the band. So we've had the Jaguar Cars Band, City of Coventry Band, even the Bourneville Musical Society.
That's one today.
I've had one of those today as well. It's an exciting thing to find, and all the stamps are all unique. So it is very interesting to see where that music's been.
I've had a couple today that have been burnt on the edges, and they were from the CWS tobacco band. And as though somebody's chucked a cigarette end away and it's caught fire.
Yeah, we've had a few that are a bit charred, but I haven't had any that have been tobacco burnt, quite like John has today.
You have to remember not to wear white clothes, don't you?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I've had Kettering footwear band and nothing got shoe marks or anything on them, so so far so good. No chocolate smears on the Bourneville works.
You talked about the original manuscripts. I mean, in the last few months, we've had original handwritten manuscripts from Alex Mortimer, and we had one a couple of weeks ago that was an Eric Ball original manuscript, and those are just priceless pieces of banding history.
Definitely, yeah.
Great excitement when we found those, haven't they?
Yeah, we've got some absolutely fantastic manuscript pieces from all different composers, and they're, like I said before, they're absolutely stunning pieces, beautiful to see, and all the little annotations they have on them. Fantastic.
I'll never get over when you look at some of the scores and there's like 20 pages. You get into 18th and 19th page, you look at it and you think, there's not been a mistake in this. It's not in pencil. And it's just amazing how people's concentration, filling that in hours that they've put in. It's amazing.
Yeah, we always say we couldn't do it, could we?
No, we can't do it.
So it's a lovely thing to see, and I'm sure we've had some examples on our social media, and if not, we will definitely have to put some up so people can see just the beautiful size. They're almost works of art, aren't they, really?
Yeah, they are, exactly.
So yeah, we will have to put them up on social media and show you all what they look like, because they are absolutely brilliant.
We also catalogue the condition of the music as well. And again, that varies greatly. We've had some pieces that are in pristine condition. We've had some copies that have got edges torn off them, or people have got writing all over them where they've annotated the parts. And I think John and I always dread opening up the folders of the ones that have been fire damaged, because sometimes we end up with little pieces of black paper. It looks like we've been sat around a barbecue. We've got all these pieces of paper everywhere. But it's important that we catalogue those conditions onto the spreadsheet, and that music is preserved. If this piece is missing, obviously we can't create those pieces, but we do log it on the spreadsheet so that in the future people would know that there's a soprano cornet part missing from that, or there's third cornet missing. So it's logged to keep it accurate. Sometimes we get to include even more information, like if it was a test piece that was written for a particular contest or was composed for a specific reason, then that gets logged as well. So it's all information is there.
As much as we can put.
Yeah, it's all put into the description in the catalogue. It's not necessarily seen on the other side, but for an archivist, it is a good thing to know. Conservation potential.
Another thing that I've found, anyway, and probably Lesley as well, is that how many pseudonyms composers and arrangers have got. I had no idea. And you click on their name on the computer and it comes up with a totally different name. And you think, whoa, hang on a minute, what's this? What's going off here? And it happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, Eleanor, the previous archivist, did a very good list of pseudonyms. And I think it was something to do with military music, to do with profit. But yeah, Eleanor did a brilliant list, and we're forever finding more.
But likewise, when you then play those pieces in concerts and you can say, oh, did you know that composer's that's not their real name? And you know, we have a bit of knowledge to share with other people.
One upon other people in a band, yeah. Yeah.
Every day's a school day.
Yes, exactly. And you guys bring the banding experience to the archive as well. Sometimes I save up my questions for a Wednesday morning. But yeah, they've catalogued quite a lot. We've got about 100 boxes left of the original sheet music. So hopefully by the end of the year, between us all, we'll have completed it. But that won't be the end of the cataloguing, because we have more and more donations that do come into the archive. We unboxed a few the other week, didn't we? And it was programmes.
There was some Whit Friday programmes, weren't
yes.
there? And booklets about the different contests and what have you. And programmes for things that we'd both played in, so which were really, really interesting. Because you go, oh yeah, I remember that.
We always had a pile of vinyl as well, didn't we? The old 78s that came in. We've got nothing to play them on, but it's interesting to look at them and put them in the archive, because obviously there will be things that we can play them on. We haven't got it here, but it will be playable.
Yeah. We had somebody who came and donated goods, and actually it was his daughter brought him to the offices here in Barnsley, and that was interesting too, because he was able to talk about the things that he was donating to the archive, which made it more real as well.
That was a bit before my time, wasn't it? We've had brilliant donors email me with lists of things and send across things that have been really exciting to unpack, and you guys tend to get so excited and look and be like, oh, I remember this, and
Can't
tell
wait
me
to
all
get
about
scissors
it.
out.
So,
You send us a WhatsApp message. I've saved this for you for
Yeah.
Wednesday. Yeah.
So John and Lesley are cataloguing to archival standards. We have a spreadsheet with all the information they need to pop in there, but they're obviously well versed now. They could probably do it with their eyes shut. Everything's packaged in acid-free folders. Sometimes they have to be bigger folders if they're sort of beautiful manuscripts that are twice the size of the folders that we do have for the archive boxes. And then eventually when we get to a certain amount, I will drive them over to Heritage Quay and add to the collection there, which is always very exciting when you come in on a Wednesday and there's no boxes there. So if you want to donate to the archive, what we do is we ask you to pop me an email with ideally a list of things you have, and we'll look at that against our collecting policy. So most archives, well, all archives will have a collecting policy. So we are uniform in what we collect and we don't take things that we shouldn't. And we basically ask you to sign a donation agreement which hands over ownership to BBE. And then we'd catalogue it, box list it, and allow people to actually look at the donation and access it at Heritage Quay. We can't take uniforms, instruments, unless they're of really, really prominent individuals, because then you'd be taking stuff forever and ever and ever, and you just don't have the capacity for it. Unfortunately, CDs that have been commercially available, which bands have recorded, we can't take at the moment due to capacity and not having a digital preservation programme in place. So what we'd like is unique contesting pieces, maybe interviews, stuff that wouldn't be commercially available. That's what we'd take. Registration cards we would take if it was a prominent individual. Manuscript music we would absolutely take because it's unique. There's nothing else like that. We have obviously lots of journals, lots of programmes. We do have gaps in some of the collections of programmes, newspapers and journals. So if you did have stuff like that, that would potentially fill a gap, pop me an email, archive@bbe.org.uk, and let me know what stuff you have and we can have a conversation. And hopefully in the future we will get more and more donations into the archive, so brass banding heritage will be preserved for future generations. You can access the collection at Heritage Quay in person, and you can book online with them, and you can have a look at the catalogue online and see what bits you can find. And that's the main aim, to preserve brass banding heritage, but also to make it accessible for everyone and make everybody more aware of banding and the importance of banding for future generations. If you did want to volunteer with the archive as well, just pop us an email at archive@bbe.org.uk. Unfortunately, we're not taking any more cataloguing volunteers. There's just the original 2 at the moment.
But we do enjoy ourselves. We have good fun on a Wednesday.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Wouldn't be the same without them.
So we've just been listening to Labour and Love by Percy Fletcher, which was written in 1913 as the first original test piece for brass band for the Crystal Palace contest that year. It's a fascinating piece of music, and it leads you on to a kind of fascinating question, which is, why brass banding and why brass banding takes over your entire life, which is kind of what it's done to me. As I said earlier, we got sucked into it at a very early age, but it didn't take long for that passion to develop. And it was playing pieces like the one you've just heard in brass bands in central Scotland at a young age that does give you a grounding in the banding repertoire. But not only that, it's given you access to a world of camaraderie and high quality dedication towards good musical performance that I think that just brings in a level of discipline and purpose to a lot of people's lives that they might never have otherwise found. Certainly, I'm aware of quite a number of people in my own experience that lives have been greatly enriched by brass bands. If you're looking around any professional orchestra in London, for a start, the brass sections are packed full of people who blew their first notes in brass bands. I've also known people who have probably been kept out of jail by the fact that they played in a brass band, and some people who weren't kept out of jail as well. But it's just that thing, though. It's got the power to induce a passion in people like nothing else that I know. And I'm not alone. I know plenty of people who are in the same position, some really high achievers, some people who are modest players but have got great lives built on the other qualities that they've acquired through being a member of a team and just being able to play music as well. It just gives you a cultural purpose in your life that you might never have had otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm always fascinated by the makeup of a band and what that looks like now, and that kind of...
It's very different from it was when I started out. I joined my first band in 1972, and it was unusual actually, because there was a couple of girls that were school age and an older woman in the band. That was quite unusual at that time, that there were any women in a band at all, and that was in central Scotland. I'd imagine in the north of England it would have been probably even more pronounced than that, but very much a male-dominated activity. And if you think at the time, there was a lot more bands as well. A lot more bands tied up with industry, coal mining, steelworks, shipbuilding, all sorts of industry, and famous bands like Ferries Aviation Works and Foden's Motor Works and CWS Manchester and the like, Black Dyke Mills and all the great colliery bands. They were entirely male at that time. Yeah. But we'll discuss this later in the series, of course, as well. But I think what we've got now is a hugely more diverse community. Yeah. And it's much better for it as well.
Definitely. And I think not even in terms of the gender split, just in the fact that in any band across the country, you'll have a doctor sat next to someone that works in a local shop, next to someone who works at the council. It's so broad. It's
a much greater cross-section of the population, yeah. Of course, in certain parts of the country, it would always be more so. I think the industrial north perception, I think there was a time when it was very much a working man's pursuit. Yeah. The working man's orchestra and all that thing. But where we've got to, and the reasons we've got there, of course, there's a great social history in there as well. And we'll talk about things like the effect of the miners' strike, and we'll talk about the industrial decline that has spurred all these changes that we're talking about. But one thing it always makes me think, though, that when you look at the number of bands that there were at a certain time and the number of men who played in them, and given that bands are probably, 30-40% women now at least, where have all the men gone?
They're still there. They're still around, I'm sure. I see them around.
Time to come back and get your instrument out from under the bed.
Yeah, and there will be so many people, whether you played at school or part of a band when you were younger and put the instrument away. There is a band near you that will help you get back involved.
There certainly is. And even people like myself who have spent considerable periods of non-activity. Just before COVID, I guess, there was a kind of 4 or 5 year period when my working life just became so chaotic that on a personal level that actually playing in a band or playing any kind of instrument seriously at all became very difficult.
And I think so much of what we're going to talk about over the next few months of this podcast is the historical context of brass banding and the roots and where that came from, but also we're going to talk a lot about what the future of banding holds. And I think it's important when we think about archives, it's not just dusty stuff held away. We certainly are very passionate that the brass band archive is a living, breathing thing that isn't just a historical snapshot. It's building, and there should be stuff coming into the archive that's really significant, but it's also modern and relevant as well.
We're creating the future right now, and what we're talking about will be history very soon. And it's important that we recognise that this is a living, breathing archive.
Yeah, and I think for us at Brass Bands England, the last 5 years, 6 years have been
cataclysmic.
It's seen change like nothing else. I've certainly never experienced such a significant organisational change in such a short period. We've gone from a team of 1, then a team of 3 to a team of 5 within about a year or so, to when this podcast goes out, I think we'll be a team of 23. So we've had such a big shift, and what we're capable of doing and how we are able to support the sector has shifted massively too. And it's only right that some really significant projects and initiatives will be recognised in the archive too. It's an exciting moment for brass bands.
And that, of course, was a part of Philip Sparks' fantastic test piece, Year of the Dragon, which was written 40 years ago, unbelievably, for the centenary of the Corey Band in Wales. Made a terrific impact at the time, and you can understand why.
Amazing piece. So we've covered a lot this week. A lot. Covered all sorts around brass banding and the archive, but we're going to be diving into a lot more detail in future episodes. So next time on the Brass Band podcast, we're going to be focusing on brass band contesting. To cover that in one podcast seems impossible.
It feels like it's something that should be a year-long project.
Yes, definitely. But for people who aren't familiar with what the competition side of the brass banding culture looks like, we're going to guide you through that in the next episode of the Brass Band podcast. The Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition is brought to you by Brass Bands England. Thank you to Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Scottish Power Foundation for their support. Thanks also to World of Brass for the beautiful music they provided. To listen to all of the music from this episode and so much more, head to wobplay.com.
To find out more about this series and the wider work of Brass Bands England, head over to our website at bbe.org.uk and follow us on social media. If you think you have a unique item that would be suitable for the archive, get in touch with us by emailing archive@bbe.org.uk.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and make sure you're subscribed to avoid missing out on any of our upcoming episodes. Share your favourite moments on social media and use the hashtag BrassBandPodcast. Your support goes a really long way. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for our next episode.